From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
I often say it that if I could have the blood transfusions to become a Queenslander, I would. Alas, the process doesn't exist. So I love everything about Queensland, and I particularly love everything about Queensland tonight because the good people of Ipswich West and a big chunk of people in Inala and lots of local government elections have absolutely wiped the giggle off Stephen Miles' face. The bloke who thought that he could get through giggling about youth crime is now hitting the reality of leading a government that no longer has the benefit of the doubt of the people of Queensland. This is a bloke who, in the lead up to this by-election, was caught lying in Parliament, only to turn around and think that the public was stupid enough to believe his explanation as to why. And after scandal claimed another member of his government, there was an opportunity for a message to be sent. Now, in the seat of Inala, which is where Anastasia Palaszczuk had resigned from Parliament, they were able to win pretty easily, but there was still a significant swing in a place that is hardcore Labor. But equally, hardcore Labor is Ipswich West. Now, this beautiful part of Queensland wasn't putting up with sending Labor any other message than a kick in the teeth. You know how pathetic Stephen Miles is and how dumb he thinks the people of this electorate and every other electorate was, because when he was standing doing the how to vote thing yesterday, there he was with the Queensland State of Origin hat on. Somehow like, don't vote against me because I'm one of you. Come on. You saw literally scenes on television news last night where people were just walking past him when it came to how to vote, so they'd give him a couple of words on the way through. Now, of course, there's another little detail here, that there was only just a bare few candidates that were running. There was no Greens that were running, and the field was pretty tight because there's going to be a state election later this year. So this is a by-election to replace a Labor MP for just a few months before everyone goes back to an election later in the year. But this was the opportunity to kick them in the teeth. But what about the games that were being played around this by-election in somehow the hope that if the Labor Party held on to the seat, or it was a particularly tight margin, he'd be able to say, don't worry, the worst of it's behind us, let's all start spinning and telling lies like we always do in the lead up to an election, and we will be able to win. What am I talking about? Well, one of the candidates that was running, in fact, the person who had the number one spot on the ballot, was the Legalised Cannabis Party. Now, I'll have a bit to say about the legalising of cannabis a little bit later in the show because we're getting some more evidence that there's a growing number of Australians, again, we can agree or disagree about whether that's the right thing to do, but there's a growing number of Australians that are actually showing via the ballot box that this is an issue that they want to back in. But this was the how to vote card that was handed out by the Cannabis Party in Queensland. Now, you can see there are no preferences offered for the second, the third or the fourth box. There was just the number one. Now, in state elections, this government has changed the rules from a just vote one system to a preferential system because, as they expect to have a lower Labor vote, they expect to follow the Albo lead, where the preferences from, among others, the Cannabis Party and the Greens will get them over the line. So you had this being handed out by the union movement on Saturday. Now, this was, do you support the Cannabis Party? Do you support cannabis being legal? So a union decided to fill in the suggestions for whom you should preference in this by-election. And funnily enough, the one that you should preference, the one at the bottom of the list, but number two in preferences would be the Labor Party candidate. Now, basically lying to people that that is the choice of the Legalised Cannabis Party when the Legalised Cannabis Party's position was vote one for us and we don't care what you do with the rest of your ballot. It was a pretty obvious attempt to create a scenario where whatever percentage that wasn't able to vote for the Greens but was going to move towards legalised cannabis was going to automatically then start to move their support behind Labor in the hopes that they would be able to hold on to the seat. Well, it's a trick. And it was a dirty trick, and it's an example of how the Labor machine, while the politicians are very unpopular, the Labor machine is ruthless, shameless and very effective in Queensland. Now, also, remember the unions are counted as independent organisations. They're not part of the Labor Party. So under all of the spending cap laws that have been put in place, what we foreshadowed, what I told you about when these laws were passed, well, every other party, bar the Labor Party, will only be able to spend this much money. I think it's about $100,000 per seat. But every single union in Queensland can also spend the same amount per seat. But there are 25 separate independent unions, which means there's a 25-to-1 money and muscle advantage for the Labor Party going into this next state election. And you saw how they tried to use that money, use that muscle in Ipswich West. Here's the LNP's Jared Blythe.
Australian Workers' Union volunteers in green cannabis shirts were packing up and getting into AWU official vehicles. So if the Labor Party say they had nothing to do with this campaign, that's rubbish. Again, more deceit, more lies, more chaos.
And it's all well and good for this to be discovered on election day. And it's all well and good for this stuff to be exposed by the media who is only focused on really one seat on election day. But what is going to happen at the state election when every single seat is up for grabs and because of early voting, and we know about a third of people vote early, will this trick be repeated in every single seat for a few weeks before the state election? Now, again, it's not because the voters are dumb, but for obvious reasons. The voters assume that the system wouldn't allow something like that. That the only people who can hand you a how to vote are people who actually represent a political party, or in this case, a candidate running. Instead, no, this is a third-party, independent advocacy group who's given exactly the same access to voters as political candidates. So this dirty trick we have seen, we now have our eyes peeled to look for it in the lead up to the Queensland election. If you are living in Queensland watching us, in whichever way you normally do, firstly, thank you very much. Secondly, can we find out how I can get the blood transfusions? Pass the law. I'm not suggesting you need to. Anyway, you get the point. But thirdly, you need to tell us when this stuff's happening. Take photos of the types of little dirty tricks that you can see and send me emails, paul@skynews.com.au. But as for the actual result, the reason the smile is off Miles's dial. Well, the numbers, and by the way, the Queensland Electoral Commission has taken way too long to count this. This is a one-off by-election and we're still under 70% of the total vote counted. This is weird, but anyway. The Labor Party's down by 15 and a bit percent. This is on the raw vote. The LNP is up by almost 19 points. One Nation was down by 4 points and legalised cannabis was up by 10 points. So if you're just adding 10% to 35%, that's 45%, but obviously that's not enough to get them there. If you were able to add 39.1 plus 10.8, well, then the LNP is going to get there. But of course, preferences from One Nation don't always go 50-50. In fact, they actually sort of maybe two-thirds will end up going to the LNP. So we'll all wait, watch and see. Current 2PP shows the Libs in front. And most likely they're going to win the seat, but with 30% of the vote still out there to be counted, who knows what's about to happen. For his part, the giggler was not smiling today.
Well, holding on to particularly Ipswich West was always going to be very hard. I said that. These results are clearly very bad. I was expecting a bad result, and they're even worse than that, clearly. They wanted to send us a message that we need to work harder, particularly on cost of living and on community safety.
For his part, David Crisafulli is not counting his chickens, is not measuring the curtains, but for obvious reasons has greater sense of hope and inevitability of what the election result may be towards the end of the year, and that he is looking pretty good to be the next Premier of Queensland.
This state needs change, and tonight residents in two Labor Party heartlands said enough is enough. And I want to thank them very, very much for it.
Now, I think David Crisafulli is the real deal. I think that the LNP is ready to govern, but you know that we felt the same way 4 years ago. 4 years ago, it felt like the absurdity of the Palaszczuk government was going to come to an end, but of course they ended up increasing their majority. Now, thankfully, we have an electoral result, not just an opinion poll, and opinion polls are turning very negatively against this government. But this government, while bad at public policy, is very good at politics, is very good at building a system which is to their advantage. Hence what I was saying before about the way that how to votes are handed out. So for there to be a breaking of the cycle of Labor being good at elections but bad at governing, people need to move their vote. Which is why I want to pay attention to some of the local council election results that were taking place also right across Queensland yesterday. Now, it shows that the Brisbane Lord Mayor was re-elected. He is a member of the LNP. This was really interesting because the assumption was that the Greens were going to grow and they were a chance of being able to use their preferences to be able to help the Labor Party get over, but that's an optional preferential system at local government areas as opposed to the state government areas, but that's good. Liberals held on to the biggest council area in the country, so that bodes well for the upcoming elections. There was no move to the left in the Gold Coast, so further down into the southeast where the Liberal Party, the LNP, are pretty strong down there. No signs of a change that's happening there. And a particularly concerning sign for the Labor Party is what's happening in Townsville. Now, Jenny Hill has been the mayor for a long time, been around local politics for even longer. I have always got along very well with her, but there's obviously crime problems in Townsville and people wanted to show that any chance they could to send a message they did. So again, with a still significant portion of the vote that is out to be counted, tonight Jenny Hill is losing to the One Nation candidate and it's by a couple of thousand votes. Now, whether that margin is going to close or not, again, we'll all wait, watch and see. The idea that we don't know who's going to be the mayor of Townsville the day after a local government election says a lot about the Queensland Election Commission, but whatever. But the point is that despite the fact that things like youth crime have been issues in the past for Townsville, they keep sending Labor people back into power. Now, you can pretty much count that there are definitely 3, maybe 4 seats that are in and around the Townsville area. The Qatar Australia Party has 1, the Labor Party has 3. That's including one of those people who says that locals that are complaining about youth crime is just part of a LNP mob, a media beat-up. But if Jenny Hill isn't returned as the mayor, then there is a move on in Townsville for David Crucifulli to become the next Premier of Queensland. He needs to be able to move some votes in places like Townsville. Now, if they can move one of those seats, they get 1 seat closer, but it is a further sign of what is starting to happen in Queensland. But wait and watch this space. Also worth noting, though, the LNP needs to probably do better on the Sunshine Coast. You see, after the last state election, a couple of LNP members lost to Labor MPs, and it seems they're not going straight back into the arms of the LNP. There's a bit of a Teely mayor that looks like she is going to win. She was a candidate and become the next mayor. So it's a beautiful state. As I say, if I could be a Queenslander, I know all of the different politics of everything from Charters Towers to the Gold Coast and all in between, and it does seem like it is moving in the right direction. But this is a devilish mob. This is a devilish mob who have taxpayer-funded polling, taxpayer-funded media machine that's able to pump out any message they possibly can. They have the advantage of both incumbency and the lead up to the Olympic Games. So Queensland, it's up to you. It's up to you to convince your neighbours and your friends and your family that it is time to make a change. I look forward to watching that change happen and cheering it on, but it's up to what the good people of Queensland do, not what those of us hope they do, but we hope they do. We all know that clueless Claire O'Neill is a hopeless person when it comes to the defending of our borders. We know her position when it comes to the detainees that have come out and the failures around the visas and the policy network that was all around that. But I want to call BS on, again, the Prime Minister and Claire O'Neill promising to do something about what many Australians view as a problem, which is too many people are coming into the country at a time when there aren't enough places for the people who already live here to find a house. We've talked about this, of course, when it comes to Melbourne, a 1-bedroom unit, which is basically a bit of a not a pleasant place, has people lined up around the block to want to go into it. There are examples, of course, in Sydney of mould-infested properties that people are willing to pay overs for because it's a place. We know that in places like Ipswich, 158 people apply for a 2-bedroom unit. We also know about the tent cities that are popping up all over the place because there's just not enough places for people to live. But this government, of course, has imported more people to the country than ever before, or certainly in the best part of a generation. Now, they promised they were going to do something about this, that they were going to take control of the immigration system. that despite the fact that they had let in hundreds of thousands of people, the best part of 750,000 people last year, there was a press conference that was held in December. That's the vision that you just saw. The headlines that came out of it said that O'Neill is to unveil a smaller migration program, that they were going to change the rules to make sure that fewer people would come into the country in 2024. In fact, she was doing her usual clueless Claire O'Neill thing, which is talk tough in front of the cameras, but have no idea what's happening behind the scenes.
Create the toughest possible preventative detention regime.
Yes, well, of course, that's the preventative detention machine that ended up falling apart, but the overall numbers of people coming into the country. Well, let's have a look here, because the far right-wing think tank known as the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they, of course, put out the details about what has been happening last year, and in 2022-23, that being the first full financial year of the Albanese government, we increased from 427,000 people coming into the country up to 737,000 people. The result is more people with fewer places to live, pushing up the prices of those places to live, let alone more people trying to access hospitals that already have ambulance ramping, particularly bad in Queensland, may I point out, let alone the number of people trying to get into schools, you know, all of the things that come with more people. Now, again, we don't care that people come here from other parts of the world. Why wouldn't you? Best place in the world. We don't care what you look like, what you believe in. All of those things are not the issue here. It's the sheer number of people that you are adding to already full roads, already adding to the population issues of Sydney and Melbourne in particular, but certainly Brisbane as well. Well, guess what happened in January, the month after clueless Claire O'Neill and her ridiculous Prime Minister stood up and told us that they were pulling the reins, pulling back on the numbers. Well, guess what? A near record number of people came through in the month of January, literally the month after they made all the promises, after they were announcing what the new plan was. Well, Australia's migration intake hit a record number of people in January, despite Albanese's government plan to slow the surge. Figures released on Thursday by the Bureau of Statistics revealed 125,000 permanent and long-term arrivals came into Australia in just January. Repeat, 125,000. The previous year was the best part of 750,000, 125,000, more people than there are in the MCG in 1 month. And that's the summer month of January. Even accounting for the people who left the country, the net growth in permanent and long-term arrivals is 55,000, or 40% higher than it was under the previous record, which was set back in 2009. So we're changing the migration settings. We understand there are probably too many people, and that creates an awful lot of strain, particularly on renting, particularly on housing. The next month, more people than 2022, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 2009. That's how long. With more people than the MCG coming in. And another issue for clueless Claire O'Neill and the hapless, useless, well, can I say idiot? Probably not. Idiot, did I say it again? Sorry. Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister. Well, we know that the High Court plays quite a role here, and they're ruling in favour of the people who we want out of the country, and if they refuse to leave the country, they go into permanent detention. Well, we're being softened up for another High Court decision, everyone. Are you sitting down? The High Court will decide if more immigration detainees should be released into the community following a critical hearing next month. What are they challenging? They're challenging the laws that keep non-citizens in custody if they refuse to be deported. So you come to the country, you're ruled not to be a refugee, but you get to just stay because you refuse to leave. That may well end up being the law of the land. Of course, the Parliament should be changing laws to make sure that even if the High Court went in that way, some preventative laws might be helpful, but wait and watch them dance around this when Parliament's back tomorrow. And Claire O'Neill is already softening us up that that's what's going to be the court decision. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill's concession that Parliament now had ceded its powers over migration to the courts, according to Simon Benson talking about this issue, is, and I agree, an alarming declaration. And while we're at it, this might feel like last week's news, but I think that it should be this week's accountability. Now, you all remember last week when there was quite the conversation after the breaking news on Channel 7 that the people who had been released from detention after the High Court decision had actually been released on visas that were not legal. You remember the story?
7 News can reveal that lawyers from the Department of Home Affairs just in recent days identified what they call technical inconsistencies.
But here's where the story turns and should be something Question Time deals with this week. Someone inside the Albanese government started spinning that this wasn't just not their fault. This was all to do with laws that had been drawn up by the evil former Liberal government. Ones that, of course, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison all kept in place. You remember the spin.
Technical inconsistencies with the original Abbott government laws.
In fact, they went out and publicly pretended that this was all a law that was broken, and the broken law was written by the Liberal Party.
This issue was a technical issue.
A technical legal issue in an Australian law that had been passed by the Parliament in 2013.
This is a technical issue that goes back to 2013.
This is an issue that had been on the books for more than a decade, since 2013, throughout, indeed, the former government's time.
So, message simple. Don't blame us, blame them. They created the bad law and we built on it like a cubby house. The foundation was wrong, it broke, it's their fault, don't blame us. And the media fell for it.
They were handed invalid visas as a result of what the government calls a technical problem. The government is at pains to point out the legal flaw dates back to 2013. The issue was identified and fixed in recent days, with correct visas now issued to the cohort of 149.
Now, here's the reality. Bronwyn Bishop went through this in great detail the other night, but you mightn't have missed it. So let me go to this here. And this was great reporting from Joe Kelly in the Australian newspaper, because he actually went and found the law, and he found the date that it was written, and he found who wrote it. And guess what? It was Brendan O'Connor, the immigration minister in the Gillard government. It was the Labor law that everything was landed on that broke. So all the spinning that the media took for granted that it was an Abbott thing when it was actually a Gillard thing means the people in the media should be asking who started that lie. Who propagated it? Who pushed it around? Who authorised it? Now, again, you saw the Labor figures, some saying 2013, they're saying that's a wiggle room, others being very clear that at the previous government, so the code wasn't particularly hard to follow along. But again, back to what Joe found a couple of days ago. The technical flaw which resulted in invalid visas being issued to the former detainees was contained in the Migration Amendment Regulation 2013 number 4, which was made on June 13, 2013, when Labor was in power. In fact, it was the dying weeks of Julia Gillard as the Prime Minister. So Kevin Rudd didn't fix it either. Brendan O'Connor was, of course, the person who was there. Now, you would think that after the media had been lied to as directly as they were lied to about this issue, either behind the scenes or by the politicians in front of the media, that somebody would follow up with a question. Grand total of public questions we can find that have been asked after this lie was spun out by the government. Duck eggs, 0. Bugger all, none. Tumbleweeds, 0. Nothing. And the Prime Minister, after this was pointed out in The Australian, after it was published here, after we showed you the receipts, the Prime Minister did a press conference the next day. Again, no questions whatsoever. Don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat. Please. Now, I personally think that a 3-year term is enough for federal politicians, but certainly they want to now follow what the state politicians do, which is to have 4-year terms. Now, the Prime Minister is in favour of a 4-year term in office. Why wouldn't he be? Because even if you have a 1-seat majority, you have it for 4 years, you don't have it for 3 years. If you're in a minority government, you can stitch it together for 4 years, not 3 years. More power, more money, more control. Now, for some reason, Peter Dutton agrees that we should have 4-year terms, because I presume he thinks if I'm in a minority government or a majority government, it's 4 years, more power, all the rest of it. Even John Howard has come out and said that he agrees that governments need to be able to govern and therefore please give us more time. 4 years would be helpful. And we even see an opinion poll was done on this question via the Australian Financial Review. 61% of people say that they would vote yes in a referendum to extend the amount of time politicians remain in charge of us. Look, I'm pretty sure that 60-40 that starts out as yes will flip to 60-40 no pretty quickly. Why? Because I agree with the point Tony Abbott made in a podcast with the IPA.
I've always taken the view that if there's a bad government, an election can't come soon enough. Mm-hmm. And if it's a good government, it shouldn't be scared of an election. So I certainly would not be in favour of any change towards 4-year fixed terms.
All right, in the United States, where, yes, it's Trump versus Biden, here we go. Again, current polls are saying it's pretty good for Donald Trump. But interestingly, the bloke who came to power with him in 2016 went to recontest power in 2020. Some people wanted to hang, unbelievably, in 2020 because he refused to overturn the election, that being Mike Pence, has now come out. And we knew that he ran against Donald Trump, but now he is openly saying he will not endorse Donald Trump. Now, in any other normal political circumstance, if your former vice president doesn't back you, then good luck going round again. But in MAGA world, it's all very different. So we'll see what happens. But that is a big moment in American politics, that a former vice president who is not on your ticket again, instead ran against you, and now is saying they won't even endorse you when you're the only option, means that's pretty big news. But for Donald Trump, he was giving a rally, I think this one was in Ohio, where he...
Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
Where he said that, and that's what they'll be talking about for the entire next 2 weeks on MSNBC. So if nothing else, he's helping the lefties have something to talk about. But there is other options. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr., I've spoken about before, is a bloke who, there's plenty of stuff he says that no, batshit, like not interested, not good, not okay, right? Particularly some of the vax stuff, all of that. But he's a really interesting candidate because he is actually coming out and talking about the stuff that neither Trump nor Biden are willing to talk about. I mean, basically the debate between Team Red and Team Blue is make America great again or defend democracy. And there's no real understanding of the problems of the United States or solutions for what they are. Now, the closer we get to an election, and if 70% of people don't want to vote for Biden or Trump, will they start to look for people like RFK? Now, he's not going to be in 50 states, which means he won't be the president, but he might be in enough of the significant and important states to be able to tip it one way or the other. But I just wanted to show you this, for you to be able to make up your own mind about the candidates that are out there, is that, again, you have to endorse all the other craziness that's with him if you ended up voting for him. But I've got to say, I do appreciate, just for a moment, even a candidate with no chance who actually talks about the real problems of the beautiful country that is the United States, because at least someone in the debate will be talking about issues like this.
We rank 40th globally in our people's health and wellness. Out of the richest countries in the world, the United States is 35th in child poverty rates, just above Mexico. We rank 36th in literacy and 45th in press freedom. We have one of the highest cancer rates in the world, and our life expectancy now ranks 59th, according to the World Bank. That's right behind Algeria, which spends less than 1/30th per capita of what we spend.
Now, again, American politics is unlike the Australian example or the English example, where you've got to turn around and say, here's the problem, here's my solution, here's my costings, the ideas. American politics is very much sort of the morality play of good guy, bad guy, person's going to rebuild the country or destroy the country. But at least somebody is talking about those issues, because I love America, right? I got married in America. I try to go there every year because it is just an awesome playground if you're a big kid like me. But it's very obvious what some of their problems are. And at least someone, if they get to the debate stage, and if you've got more than 10% of the national vote, you get to qualify for the debates. He's currently got 15. In some states, he's got 20% of the vote, which would mean if there was ever to be a debate between Biden and Trump, he would be there. And at least someone would be talking about the stuff that the other two definitely don't want to talk about because they've got no idea how to fix it. It'll be fascinating to see, watch and learn, but we follow the bouncing ball together each and every night here on Paul Murray Live. All right, big debate coming up in a moment's time. Also, jump onto the socials, tell me, what is your bold prediction for the week ahead, or send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. But I really want to get into this dirty tactic stuff because we've got examples, we've got receipts, including with a bloke who's going to be running in the Queensland election a little later in the year. The smile off Miles' dial, and I couldn't be happier. More in a second. Thank you very much for watching. We've got a great Sunday night here. Joining us, of course, from Adelaide right now, carryover champ as always, is the wonderful Nicole Flint, former Liberal MP and fingers crossed future something, Governor General, whatever you'd like to. Any job is yours. He's running in the seat of Keppel at the upcoming state election. He's, of course, Chief of Staff to Pauline Hanson, none other than our dear friend, James Ashby. And the cartoons are great. He's got such a big hand in those, and the cartoons are great this year. I love them. All right, and Sam Crosby, I think this is the first time you've been back since you went overseas.
This year.
You know, went off and just, scholarships and learning everything, and, you've come back sort of...
Went and saw the United States through their prison system.
Did you? Wow, don't say that.
It's a hell of a way to see a country, through their mental health facilities, through their prisons, through their homeless shelters. Hell of a way to see a country.
Now, I just want to ask you this. Do you agree with me that whatever that orange cheese is, it's amazing?
I don't eat cheese.
Oh, okay, damn it.
Sorry.
Typical lefty.
It's
lactose.
Come on.
Anyway, no, fair enough. We were doing so well till then. All right, let's talk about what happened in Brisbane. Let's talk about what happened in Queensland, of course, yesterday, Ipswich West. Now, James, let's get to the dirty tactics stuff, because we can all revel in the joy of Giggles having a bad night. But it really is an example of what you're up against when you are running against this government, be it as a minor party or even as the straight-up opposition. They've changed the funding laws which say that you as a party can only spend X thousand dollars in a seat, but independent groups can also spend as much as you. Under this legislation, the unions are independent groups, and there are 25 different unions, which means if they wanted to come against you, you've got 26-1 money on top of you. And then we have the scenario where people are handing out how to votes that are clearly misleading, but is completely legal and able to be done by the very same people who are independent from the Labor Party. So how do you fight it? How do you beat the system? Because my heck, that is a big system to fight.
Well, you're right, Paul. I'm capped as a candidate here in the seat of Keppel with a $60,000 budget. So I'll use every bit of that to try and get my message out to households across this region. So the unions are capped, but they're capped at $90,000.
Wow.
And so, as you say, there's 20-odd unions. They can put all that together and really come at me. And I expect them to do that in a seat like this, where they're desperate to try and hang on to seats across Queensland. Not just that. You might have noticed that how to vote card, it was not approved by the Electoral Commission. If I'm a candidate in one of these elections, I actually have to make sure that it complies with the Electoral Commission. So do they to a degree, but not to the same degree. And they have just cheekily come up. And as you know, the unions, they get their members on board those booths, so they've got plenty of people to hand them out, and it creates market confusion. So that is what's happened in Ipswich West. And as a result too, being the union, they were well prepared. They've seen a rise in that vote for the legalised cannabis party as well. 15%, that's unheard of.
Well, and this is where, we know the Greens weren't running, so whether that became the proxy. But Sam, no one's breaking the news about the relationship between the Labor Party and the unions. But under these funding arrangements, they're completely independent, despite the fact that, of course, the whole organisation of the Labor Party is 50-50. So let's talk about the Labor machine in Queensland. Now, I think it's terrible at governing, but it's great at politics, right? It's amazing at elections. Looking at what happened yesterday and all of the caps and the system stuff that James is talking about, is Labor out of it, or the system is so bent to incumbency's favour that you can pull it out of the fire? What's your sense of the mission ahead?
Honestly, I have no idea about where it's going to end up. And I think since 2016, I've stopped picking any elections and the outcomes. What I would say is everyone gets very worked up when we propose a change to, or when anyone gets proposed a change to an electoral law. We did the same thing that they implemented in Queensland, in New South Wales in, I think it was 2011, with the same provisions. And everyone said, the unions are going to dump a pile of money. And from time to time they do. So when Mike Baird was proposing the electricity privatisation, they ran a big anti-electricity privatisation campaign against him. Sorry?
But lost.
And lost, that's right. And one of the big things is you can't just give the Labor Party a chunk of money, or the Liberal Party a chunk of money for them to go and spend. However, you've got to run on an issue, and you've got to say at the end, so the ETU says don't sell it. And you're like, well, OK, I can make up my own mind as a voter, I'll decide. So I get James's point, and I get the LNP's point that they all feel very under the gun there. I don't think it matters one jot. Nicole Flint's here. She's been up against Get Up and whatnot, having a go at her. Didn't matter at all for her. I had it in 2019 when I was a candidate.
Well, it mattered for her very personally, but in terms of the electoral result, yes.
But as a result, in 2019 when I was a candidate, we had all the Teachers Federation doing the I Give a Gonski stuff. Didn't matter.
So that's an interesting point, Nicole, which is, okay, so you've got all of this, messaging, you've got the, don't hold a hose, or, the black and white picture and the ooga booga of whoever the leader is, and cuts, all of that stuff that's around. Increasingly elections, of course, very local, and you knock around as much as you can, but there's just the endless conversation that happens nationally. So how do you push through when there is a money advantage or a manpower advantage that's running against you, and there are, frankly, people that are willing to, they invent the 25th hour in the day when they're coming after you?
Well, I completely disagree with Sam. It has a huge impact. And I'm with James. You're absolutely up against it. You're the underdog, and you absolutely cannot outspend them. We certainly didn't even come close to what Labor, Get Up and the unions did in Boothby in 2019. No way did we spend nearly as much as them. But it's also the people power on the ground. So the only thing you can do, Paul, as a candidate in that situation, as I was, is just stick to your game plan, keep serving your community, keep turning up to all of the local events. And also, when you're doing that, you're listening to your community, you're formulating policies on the ground that reflect back to your community what they have said to you. And so you're meeting their needs by the commitments that you're making. And that's how you hold on. But I just think it is grossly unfair that this is allowed. I hope that when the LNP is elected in Queensland in the near future, that they get rid of these very unfair laws. It should be an even playing field, and we still have failed to work out how to properly deal with third parties in this country. Because they are not held to the same standards. As you've just said, they're not held to the same standards that the political parties are, and yet they're operating exactly like political parties.
Yeah, and as we saw, the left carrying on about Advance Australia in Dunkley, but the reality was, again, no matter how much money and all the rest of it, obviously didn't swing things in the direction they go. But certainly, if the tide's going out on you, that advantage is doubled. If things are starting to move your way, then, okay, it starts to reinforce the message like, say, the Don't Hold a Hose union stuff that was around in 22. But, James, just one last one here, which is about some of the things that we noticed in the local government elections, right? So, as I mentioned before, the bloke branded One Nation looks like he's in front. Who knows why the Queensland Election Commission can't count the amount of votes in the Townsville mayoral race in one night. But anyway, still about, 30% of the vote out. But there are a couple of thousand in front, so, you'd prefer to be him than the incumbent. Plus, a couple of other changes. Is there anything that's starting to tell you where Queensland's going based off what happened at the really local level yesterday?
Oh, look, it's pretty obvious that, there is a definite swing out there against this Labor government. But even on a local level, I was in a polling booth in Quarrel yesterday for council. My brother-in-law was running. And so I was standing there. Look, there's two things I'd like to see change before this next state election. Number one, ban how to vote cards. I think the public have had a gutful of people shoving bits of paper in their face. Tasmania's actually got a really good plan down there. They've got a 600-metre buffer zone. And honestly, we should try that here in Queensland. I know the Gladstone local elections actually created one polling booth out of the whole electorate where they banned it. And you know what? The numbers of people that went to that polling booth were astronomical. So that just goes to show most people don't want to take
Sorry, James, is it compulsory preferential in Queensland?
Not in local. It is in state, though.
Right.
In local...
Because, why would you have...
Depending on the makeup. No. Yeah. Look, this is the thing. But I had people rocking up at the polling booth going, what do they stand for? I don't even know what they want. So voters aren't engaged at the moment. They don't know what these political parties are standing for, or particularly at a local level with council. So I've got no excuse for the ECQ. They should have counted many more of these booths and declared winners by
again,
this stage.
you know, sorry if, you know, your brother works for them or somebody's watching or, you know, like, I'm sure they're all decent people, but goodness me, the website looks like it's a GeoCities site. The font's terrible, and they can't count the votes. Like, something might need to change under the next mob. But let's talk now about some other issues, right, and let's get a bit more national. On the immigration question. So, Nicole, the Prime Minister and clueless Claire O'Neill stand there in December last year and say, we are changing the program, we are cutting back on the 700 and whatever thousand from the previous year. And then the next month, more people come in 1 month than 2000 and then all the way back to 2009. Yet I guarantee tomorrow there'll be no question about this in question time. No follow-up in the press releases anywhere. This is literally, they promised one thing in December, the opposite happened in January.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, Labor have completely lost control of the entire immigration portfolio. So it's not just record numbers of people being allowed in when they're saying, oh, no, we're cutting down because we know we don't have enough houses to house everyone and our infrastructure is under pressure and our hospitals are under pressure and cost of living's through the roof. But then it's also the detainee side of things. So there seems to be literally no minister within that portfolio who is capable of doing their job properly. I know when we last saw this level of incompetence, it was during the Rudd years, and we know how that story ended. So Albanese needs to get his ministry in order and get all of these various immigration-related issues under control very quickly, or it's going to hurt them very badly at the next federal election.
I mean, Sam, I know that until there's some evidence that a vote goes another way, they'll keep doing everything the way they do it, right? But if you recognise it's such a big problem that you stand up there in December and say, all right, we're going to pull it all back, and then in January there's an immediate opposite effect.
Not a great look.
But now they'll be able to say, well, the policy settings only apply to financial years and we didn't fill out the paperwork and technically...
Well, I was going to ask, what happened in February? Did February...
We don't have those numbers yet.
Right.
But this idea, right, so you just turn around and go, there was something that was starting to build up about this government and the Redbridge polling organisation. And by the way, they do a chat with Laura Jays each and every Monday morning. It's really interesting. Said that one of the things that was starting to bubble around the government was a sense of incompetence, right? And that was in relation to cost of living. They say they fixed that with tax cuts. And then it was about the borders, right? We're being softened up that the courts may turn on common sense again. And there's this issue about the number of people coming in. But it seems like any push here is responded by people like nasty Nikki Sava who say that it's offensive to talk about immigration. It's a low road to public office. It matters, right? Look, I want people to come in here and be happy. Sure, I also want them to find a place to rent.
Yeah, there's no question that if an election is held on immigration, Labor loses. Has always been the case, always will be the case. So, you know, obviously Labor's going to want to talk about health, education, blah, blah, blah. That said, there's no question that there's a problem in the immigration system that needs to be tightened up. But I think to your point, and also to Nicole's point, where this hurts is in the housing market. And this is where I've been saying for you, and, you know, look, I work for Vinnie's, right? We're a homelessness charity, we're a housing charity. Obviously, I've got a housing bent to me, but I think we need to supercharge the housing budget and the, you know, they have already, to be fair to them.
Well, that's what's interesting with the Minns government in particular, right? They've gone bang, bugger this council's out of the way.
They've got a great housing minister.
They have a wonderful housing minister. You know, you can welcome on the show at some point in time. But anyway, of course, talking about Rosie's missus. But it feels like, again, the housing issue, it cuts so many different ways. So when people turn around and hear about 100,000 people coming in, they go, mate, I'm already sitting how long in traffic and I'm already this and already that. The government can put forward all the economic arguments that they want. I just think the way normal people process it.
But I think the antidote to that is to go and drop another however many $1 billion and actually build some more houses and break the back of the housing supply problem.
Yeah. All right, James, you disagree. I know I've got to go to a break here, but give me the 30-second and then you can pick it up on the other side.
Oh, well, Albo's $4 billion he's given to housing in the Northern Territory at a cost of $1.4 million a house for Indigenous people. Come on, it's just, they're not spending their money wisely. And the problem that we've got in this country, the universities are writing the immigration ticket for all these foreign students, and we've got 122,000 homeless people in the country. There's some big problems for both state and federal government to fix up on housing.
We'll talk Utes, we'll talk doomsday cults, we'll talk predictions for the week ahead here on Paul Murray Live. The Royal Report coming up after us at the top of the hour. And don't forget, podcasts, highlights, videos, skynews.com.au. All right, speed round now with our wonderful Sunday night guests. Thank you very much for watching us. Here, of course, with Sam Crosby, who's double-checking the talking points. The wonderful Nicole Flint and James Ashby, who'll be setting up the Christmas tree soon. He's always the first each and every year, and I know it's March, but still, we'll see what happens. All right, now, these protesters that turned up and did the whole Extinction Rebellion nonsense, middle of Melbourne, the Sheila who's done it a bunch of times before, in and out of courts. I couldn't help but think this, James, that, OK, they want to make you a doomsday cold if you don't follow our way, it's all the rest of it, right? And, the planet's ending because of climate change. If they crossed the river, turned left and went down to this thing called the Chinese consulate, they'd be able to make their point in front of the representatives of the people who are 30 times worse than what we are. You would think if literally you're willing to do what they do because the world's coming to an end, you might have the stones to actually go to the person who's killing it more than anyone else. But they don't, do they?
Yep. No, these people couldn't give a stuff what China's doing. They just want to cause mayhem. And, I found it really hard to believe that their blockage of a main arterial road through the middle of Victoria the other day meant a woman had to give birth in the back of an ambulance caught in that traffic jam. It's just... they don't care. And I think slowly but surely the public's starting to get sick and tired of this. I love the Germans' approach to this. I've seen on Instagram and YouTube and that enough of these German coppers just run over, rip them off the tarmac, doesn't matter whether they're glued or otherwise, and just drag them to the side of the road. We need to start doing the same thing here. We've had a gutful.
I like the locals also who fire up as well. I don't mind that. Again, I don't want people to be assaulted, but still, I like the idea of saying, out of the way, please. But feel free, go to the China thing, right? Now, interestingly, while we're talking about the by-election in Queensland, big chunk of the vote for legalised cannabis. Now, there have been 2 legalised cannabis people elected to the upper house in Victoria, 1 in New South Wales, 2 in Western Australia, and I reckon there's a chance, if it's half senator, they could end up with a senator from somewhere around the country at some point, right? Particularly if the thresholds in places like Tasmania are as low as they are. Now, brings me to an organisation that came out today suggesting 54% of people would support the decriminalisation of cannabis. This is a one-issue party. They're in a position of balance of power in multiple seats, and this is the price for you can do everything else, just legalise this. Now, in fairness, Chris Minns and the Victorian Premier both said, no, we're not going to go there. But Nicole, regardless of whether we think it's the right thing or not, and obviously I don't smoke pot, so I'm not planning on this becoming part of my weekend, if people are being elected on the one issue, it's fair to say they're going to try to get the one issue passed through the Parliament. Do you think in the next 10 years we get close?
I certainly hope not, Paul. I think that would be a terrible outcome for Australia. The health risks are well known, and I just find it quite extraordinary that these people are even getting elected, but we do get some quirky independents from time to time. So hopefully they'll just be another blip on the historical radar. And I must say I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that the New South Wales Premier and Victorian Premier are saying, no, we're not going to buy your vote and give you what you want, because we're going to, I assume, their position is that they want to protect public health and safety, and congratulations to them if that is the reason for their position.
But it is always interesting. I just put a pin in it. This is the show where we talk about what's going on, show you the receipts, right? Which is compulsory voting exists in the country, right? I don't want to vote for the Greens because they're too nutty, right? But I've still got to go vote anyway, right? That's this constituency, apart from people who maybe want to see a change. All right, bold prediction for the week ahead, Sam Crosby. What's absolutely happening this week?
I'm going to say that Kate Middleton does some sort of a press conference, and she's found.
She's found.
She's found.
She reveals
there is
herself.
An actual photo or a verifiable photo. That's my bold prediction.
I want them to fill her with whatever they gave Biden for State of the Union, because if she's sick, she'll be fine for 90 minutes. James, your bold prediction. I've got to go after that.
Given Sam Crosby's trip to the States to go and check out all those privatised prisons, I'm guessing that's Labor's new stance for Queensland. They'll privatise all our prisons.
If only I had such
on you, Sam.
sway. I'm going to pick up the phone and
Good
no
on
one's
you.
listening.
All right, fire up. This is the mean machine. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much, Nicole. I promise you get to go first next week. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. See you next Sunday. Quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live and the Royal Report, where it will be wall-to-wall Kate. No doubt. I'm sorry. It's just the way it has to be. 4 minutes from now on Sky News. We're done for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget all the highlights, skynews.com.au, YouTube channel as well. Big week planned. And this time next week, we're in Balgowlah for a special edition of Our Town. If you want to join us, Our Town at skynews.com.au. I apologise, but here's the Royal Report.